Talk about this a little more now with the executive director of the Institute for Public Accuracy and coordinator for rootsaction.org, Norman Solomon. How are you today, Norman?
Fine, thank you.
Can you start by telling me why you participated or were here today at this event at the National Press Club to publicize the petition calling on Congress and Defense Secretary Mattis to remove all U.S. warplanes from Syria?
Well, as Americans, I'm afraid that we are party to an almost invisible war as far as Americans are concerned. And half a dozen groups got together to put forward this idea, which I think is crucial, that Syrian airspace should not be a place where U.S. planes are flying and bombing, and that also includes drone aircraft. As we just heard a minute ago, John Kiriakou, the CIA whistleblower, pointed out this morning at our news conference at the National Press Club that, like it or not, there is an internationally recognized government there, the Assad regime. I don't like that regime. I think we should denounce that regime. That doesn't change the fact that the U.S. government has no right to fly its own planes into Syrian airspace without the permission of the Syrian government.
And we should mention as well, part of the secret war that's been waged on Syria, which you've described, is also ground forces. I mean, there are U.S. military personnel training militias on the ground. We know the CIA ran what they've admitted now is a $1 billion program to train and equip Syrian rebels. So this is a very large secret war, almost, Norman, as you say. Why won't the media ever talk about it? Or at least point out what the U.S. has done to create the situation there?
Well, in terms of U.S. media, in general, the mass media describe it in a fairly favorable way. It's the modern equivalent of 30 years ago. 40 years ago in Central America, we heard the line that there were freedom fighters. They were supposed to be in existence in Nicaragua, the CIA-backed Contras. Then in Afghanistan, the freedom fighters to kick out the Soviet troops in the 1980s. And I think what needs to be adhered to and pushed for is a single standard of human rights. We don't want intervention by the U.S., by Russia, by any other countries to go in and bomb people who are trying to get on with their lives. And as Americans, I think we need to face the fact that there are 800+ U.S. military bases outside of this country, around the world, a grand total of 40 military bases for all the other countries of the world outside their borders. That is an indication of just how expansionist in a political, geopolitical sense the U.S. government has been and the Pentagon has been. And we need to face that fact and then pull back on that political and military power.
Absolutely stunning fact there you've pointed out. You haven't only spoken out against U.S. escalation in Syria, you're also a vocal critic of the sanctions regime recently imposed against Russia, signed into law by President Trump. Why do you think sanctions are a hazardous policy?
Well, it's really an escalation towards Russia. And the fact is that what took place after the sanctions were approved by Congress was totally predictable. As a matter of fact, I had a piece in USA Today just before the response from Vladimir Putin, which was to then escalate and order hundreds of diplomatic personnel off the jobs, in many cases out of the country in Russia. And this is a spiral that involves the two nuclear superpowers on the planet. So in a way, it doesn't matter if people like or hate Trump, like or hate Putin. We have one planet. We have thousands of nuclear weapons in the arsenals of each of those countries. And it is, in some sense, insane to believe that there's something ethical about escalating the tensions. We should be trying for détente. We should be trying for better relations.
Which is something Trump has been lambasted for suggesting. Of course, these sanctions are being implemented in response to Russian meddling in last year's election, according to those who support the sanctions. Do you buy that justification?
Well, whether Russia intervened in the U.S. elections or not, that doesn't change the fact that escalating towards nuclear war is an attack on the survival of the human species. So I don't think that the Kremlin or the White House are as pure as any driven snow we can imagine. In the real world, though, to escalate towards nuclear conflagration is beyond irresponsible. And I think it would be very helpful for people around the world, and as Americans, I think it's especially important to get off our very high horses, stop preaching to the world, and begin to curb our own imperial policies, which have been and continue to be so militaristic.
As someone who's dedicated their career to as a media watchdog to really hold the media accountable, what do you think of the condition of the fourth estate today? I mean, they could be going after Trump if they wanted to be critical of Trump for so many things domestically, if they wanted to do stories criticizing the administration. But if you turn on the TV, all you hear mostly is Russia, Russia, Russia. That's been their tactic.
Well, you know, Donald Trump unfortunately has an aversion to facts, and he lies so often. And yet, when you look at his foreign policy, it's that parable that sometimes a broken clock is correct once every 24 hours. I think his statements in favor of détente are absolutely correct. And in terms of foreign policy, he has been hammered and denounced by the U.S. mass media precisely for his best policies. And we ought to re-examine why that is the case, because there is a tremendous war lobby in this country. It's lucrative, military-industrial complex. We've got to turn that around.
Turning it around may be very difficult, though, as you know, especially with the media. I mean, when you hear something like a peace agreement being reached in Syria, what we heard is, oh, it means Trump's Putin's puppet, not, you know, celebrating the potential de-escalation of a conflict there. Do you see us just headed down a perilous path at this point, or what are the opportunities for de-escalation?
Well, it's certainly perilous. I mean, our news conference this morning was an effort to help turn this momentum, this very dangerous, destructive, ominous momentum around, so that when we're calling for pulling U.S. airplanes and drones out of Syrian airspace, we're saying that escalating and escalating some more is not predetermined. It's up to whether we can marshal the strength from the grassroots to say that what Martin Luther King Jr. called the madness of militarism must be opposed and must be stopped.
He said, what, militarism, racism and materialism
yes.
are the three main drivers of U.S. empire, something he gets less credit for pointing out, I think, these days.
Yes, there's a lot of stuff, you know, what Jesse Jackson called the idle dreamer, the martyr on the postage stamp. We hear a lot about I have a dream. We don't hear a lot about how Martin Luther King was a great peace activist.
Targeting the military-industrial complex here, Executive Director for the Institute for Public Accuracy and Coordinator for RootsAction.org, Norman Solomon, always great to talk to you.
Thank you.